Today for your story, it's called If I Were President, and it's by Catherine Steyer, and it's illustrated by Diane DeSalvo Ryan. If I Were President is an informational text, so it's about real people, animals, places, events. It contains facts. It may use diagrams, photographs, or other illustrations, and it presents the information in a clear way. Now, one of the things I want you to think about, your essential question, is what would you do if you were president? And we're going to learn a lot about the American presidents, and we need to think about what it takes to be a good leader, and also where the president of the United States works and what he does. Now, where he works is at the White House, and the White House is in Washington, D.C. So this is a picture of the White House, and this is a picture of the city, Washington, D.C. And you can see there's the Lincoln Memorial and the Washington Memorial. You can see the Capitol Dome, and the White House is in that, should be in that shot too. So the president works in Washington, D.C. We are going to be using the comprehension strategies, asking and answering questions, and also clarifying. And remember, when you ask yourself questions as you read, it helps you remember information. So you're asking the who, the what, the when, the why, the where, and the how. You ask yourself those questions. It helps you understand what you read and also remember what you read. Clarifying helps us go back and look at anything that we might find confusing or that we don't understand, and we make sure that we do understand before we go on so that we are getting the most out of what we are reading. All right, let's read If I Were President. It would be great to be the President of the United States. If I were president, that means after a big campaign with speeches and posters and TV ads, the people would have chosen me as their leader. Years of planning and hard work would have prepared me for that day. If I were president, I promise to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States, because that would be my job. Now, I think there's a lot of information on this page, and some of it might be a little confusing. So it keeps saying, if I were president, if I were president. Who is talking there? Who's asking that, asking that if I were question? If I were president? Well, we can see that there's a little girl, and she looks maybe like about your age. And she has her hand on the Bible, and she's like taking the oath of office. So she's like kind of imagining what it would be like if she were president. She's got her important people, probably mom and dad, behind her. So another thing that may be a little confusing are things like the words preserve and protect and defend. Well, to preserve means to keep it like it is. Protect it means to keep it from any kind of harm or for somebody doing something bad to it. And it talks about preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. And the Constitution of the United States is our big body of laws. All right, so a lot of information, a good time to stop and clarify. That way we're understanding what we would read. Then I'd move to a mansion called the White House with more than 100 rooms. And I'd have to remember my new address, 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, Washington, D.C. If I were president, I'd start work early each morning in the Oval Office. Although I'd try to do what's best for my country, not everyone would agree with my decisions. But I'd get help making those decisions from a group of people called my cabinet. Okay, so this is why we're using our clarifying strategy today, because there's a lot of information, right? A lot of information. So we already talked that the president works in the White House, and it's a big mansion, and she even gives the address of the White House. It's 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, Washington, D.C. She also says that the White House has 100 rooms in it, but her office would be called the Oval Office, And she would get help making important decisions from a group of people called her cabinet, or the cabinet. And the cabinet is the name just of the group of people that help the president make important decisions. So you can see why we're using that clarifying strategy, because there's a lot to think about on these pages, right? A lot of information. If I were president, the people would be my boss, and I'd have to find out what they wanted. It wouldn't be easy. Different people would want different things. Here's another time that we probably should stop and clarify. It says that the people would be her boss. Now, how does that work? Well, we elect our president. So if we like what they do, we elect them again. If we don't like what they do, we choose someone else to do the job. So we are really their boss. If I were president, I'd be in charge of the armed forces, the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines. If I were president, each year I'd give a speech to Congress called the State of the Union. All over the country, people would be watching and listening. I'd talk about how our country was doing and suggest ways to solve our problems. Okay, so there's a place to ask yourself a question because it seems like there's something important on this page. So we could ask ourselves, what? What is the name of the speech that the president gives? The State of the Union. They give a speech every year called the State of the Union. So that's a good time to stop and ask a question about what we read. It's not really confusing because it explains that it's a speech that they give to Congress and that people all over the country would be watching and listening. So we know what it is, but just to remember what it's called, ask the what? State of the Union. Imagine creating laws for a whole country. That's something Congress and I would work on together. If I were a president, the agents of the Secret Service would guard me everywhere I'd go. They'd go too. If I were president, I'd travel in my limousine or in my own private airplane, Air Force One. I'd meet with the leaders of other nations. Maybe together we could work to improve our world. Okay, here's a good time to stop and ask ourselves some more questions. Who are the people that protect the president? Oh, the Secret Service. Here they are back here. They're dressed usually in suits. They wear those glasses and they protect the President of the United States. They are the Secret Service. Okay, what is the name of the private airplane that our president uses to travel on? Air Force One. Air Force One is what that plane is called. If I were president, I'd comfort families that had been in an earthquake, hurricane, or flood. Then I'd help them rebuild their towns. If I were president, one of my favorite jobs would be passing out medals to people who had done brave deeds. All right, so maybe this is a good time to stop and ask some questions. Like maybe, I wonder how often the president gives medals for brave deeds, or who does he give them to? Now, these aren't questions that are answered inside this text, but we could find it in another text. The president gives medals of honor to people all times of the year, as often as he deems necessary. And he gives it out to usually members of his military, right? Those are the people that do the brave deeds, could be police officers or someone who's helped in some sort of a disaster relief, like he talks about here with the earthquake and the hurricanes and the floods. If I were president, my words and picture would appear in the newspapers and magazines all over the world. Even my dog would make headlines. If I were president, the house I grew up in would be famous. People would ask my mom for a tour of everything, even my treehouse. If I were president, the people could only elect me twice. That's 8 years altogether. Soon, a new president with different ideas would move into the White House. If I were president, they might someday make a statue of me, like the white marble statue of Abraham Lincoln in the Lincoln Memorial, or the president's heads that's carved into Mount Rushmore. Now, we've talked about those things before when we talked about American symbols. I talked about Mount Rushmore, and this little girl's imagining what her face might look like if it were carved into Mount Rushmore. Uh-oh, there we go. Or someday, my face might show up on our country's money. Did you know President Lincoln is on the penny? President Jefferson is on the nickel, and President Washington is on the dollar bill. You know what? We did know that because we've talked about that before when we were talking about money and we were talking about presidents during President's Day, right? And who knows, someday I might just be president of the United States. All right. So, what are some other questions that we can recall? Well, we could talk about who's on the penny. Who's on the penny? Yep, President Lincoln. We could talk about who's on the $1 bill, President Washington. There are other presidents on money too, so we may have those questions that we could go and find the answers to. Before we go, though, we need to talk about some of our vocabulary, and I have to go back. There. The first word that we're going to talk about is the word president. If I were president, all right, let's see what president means.
President, the person who is in charge of the one part of the United States government. The president is a leader. The president helps run the country. President.
All right, so the president is the person who is in charge of one part of the United States government. He's in charge of the executive branch. He's the president of the United States. So he's the guy in charge. Now, the next word we're going to do is the word leader. The people would have chosen me as their leader.
Leader, a person who is in charge of something. Miss Bailey is the team leader. She is in charge of her team. Leader.
So he said the president is the leader of the United States, right? The leader of the United States. All right. The other word that we're going to talk about today is the word defend. I promise to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution.
Defend, to keep from harm. The helmet will defend my head. Defend.
So defend means to keep from harm. So they're going to protect the Constitution. They're going to defend the Constitution. They're going to keep it from harm. That's what the president promises to do. All right, I will include the discussion starters so you can talk with your big person about some of the things that we learned about in If I Were Your President.